Chamber of Commerce webinar series. My name's Alf Torrance, I'm the Executive Director of the RBCC, and I'm delighted to welcome the British Ambassador to Russia, Her Excellency Deborah Bronnett, Trevor Lewis, Head of DIT in Russia, and Sarah Pilbeam, Acting Consul General at the British Embassy, to today's discussion. I'd also like to give a special thanks to today's event sponsor, Citi Russia, and welcome Katerina Komarova, Retail Bank Head at its Citi Consumer Business, and Katerina will say a few words in a minute. Thank you, of course, to all RBCC members and friends for joining us today as well. Before we get started, the normal ground rules as how the webinar will run. After I've finished, as I mentioned, Katerina will say a few words. I'll then invite Her Majesty's Ambassador and her team for some opening remarks. As always, you probably want to put questions to the Ambassador and her team, so please use the chat room function to send us your questions during the course of the webinar, and myself and my team will be monitoring the chat room and we'll try and pick out the more popular themes. We've already received 5 or 6 questions by email, and if we have time, we'll ask those as well. As always, please keep yourself on mute throughout unless when speaking. And as always, we'll be recording this webinar and we'll post it on the website straight after we finish. Katerina, very many thanks to you and Citi Russia for sponsoring today's event. Interesting times to be a banker, and we'd be very interested to hear any comments you may have.
Absolutely, thank you, Al, and thank you for the introduction, and dear guests, good afternoon. My name is Katerina Komarova. I'm Retail Bank Head for Citi Russia, and our premium segment, Citi Gold, is pleased to partner with RBCC to hold the meeting today. Our Russian division of Citi has a long-standing relationship with our London office, and we together provide a wide range of wealth management products and services to our clients. And we are glad to contribute to the development of business relations between our countries, and hope you will enjoy the event today. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Ambassador, Trevor, Sarah, very many thanks for once again taking the time to speak to the Russo-British business community. I think this is already the 4th such event we've run during the pandemic, and I know, speaking to the members, that it's hugely appreciated. So thank you very much. Much has happened since our last talk in June, and I know with Christmas fast approaching, there's a level of anxiety surrounding what people will or won't be able to do. Ambassador, can you offer any reassurance?
Apologies, I will unmute myself. So look, thank you very much, and good afternoon to all the participants. It's great to see you, if only virtually, and obviously we're all hoping, with some of the news we're seeing, that at least in 2021 we'll be able to resume some of the sort of more normal things that we were used to before the pandemic. But maybe if I may, I might say a little bit about what we've been doing recently in the embassy in terms of UK-Russia, and then talk a bit about COVID, and then a bit more about what's going on in the UK, and then I'll allow Trevor to talk a bit more about trade and what we're doing there, and Sarah perhaps to say a few words about travel and so on, and then of course we're looking forward to all the questions and discussion. Maybe if I may, I wanted to start by mentioning what I think was a really successful visit now 10 days ago by the FCDO Minister Wendy Morton, and this was the first visit to Russia by a British minister since 2017, and of course I should say it was you know, quite a sort of tricky visit for a British minister to make, given that there hadn't been one for a number of years, and also quite tricky traveling in a pandemic, and that was certainly one of the challenges we found in terms of organizing it for her. But she was really impressed with what she heard and what she saw. I think it demonstrated that despite the complexities and difficulties in the UK-Russia relationship, that we are able to talk to one another at a political level in quite a lot of detail, And while of course there remain areas on which we continue to disagree, there's also quite a lot of scope for collaboration and cooperation. And all of those, that very wide range of issues were all covered in her official discussions, but also the other meetings that she had. And that of course included members of both the UK and Russian business community. She really enjoyed those. I know she would have wanted to see more people, but I am afraid because of COVID restrictions, we had to be really limited in the numbers that she could actually physically see. So the rule of 6, which as some of you will know applies in England, we had to apply that to the visit as well. But that was, I think that was a sort of positive, we're not quite at the end of 2020, but it was a positive coming towards the end of 2020 in terms of the ability of the British and Russian governments to talk to one another despite all the issues, and engagement on business and support certainly from both governments, I think, for economic and commercial ties between Russian and British business. You might have noticed I mentioned FCDO. I should just say that since the last time we had one of these briefings with you, the FCO and DFID have merged. It doesn't have such a big impact on what we do in Russia, but it has meant quite a lot of change around the global network, and obviously for our colleagues back in the centre. COVID, of course, hasn't sadly gone away. We're now very much in the midst of the second wave, both in the UK and in Russia, and it remains a major concern. I think most of us, even if we expected a second wave, I think we were rather hoping that things would be better now. But of course, that isn't yet the case. And it continues to be really serious in both the UK and Russia. And I'm really conscious that this has been very hard on all of us as individuals, our families, as well as on business and on the economy. I'm hoping that some of the visa issues that people were experiencing have perhaps got a bit better, although I know there are some big challenges around Christmas, particularly for non-British nationals. British nationals have continued to be able to travel between the UK and Russia throughout the autumn. I'm sure Sarah can say a bit more about this, but some of you will be aware that the UK, I mean, we didn't close our borders at all actually during the pandemic, but we did introduce a 2-week self-isolation policy for most travellers coming to the UK. And some of you will be aware that from the middle of December, so from the 15th of December, there will be an option for travellers coming into England from Russia to opt for 5 days self-isolation and then a test. And obviously, providing that test is negative, they would be released from the obligation to self-isolate. So I think that's a positive development. The other positive development I wanted to talk about on COVID is, of course, that we now have at least 4 vaccines globally that look as if, from the results, that they will be both safe and effective. That includes the British one, it includes one of the Russian ones. And some of you will know that today the UK regulator has approved the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And I think that's great news. It will mean, certainly in the United Kingdom, that some of the most vulnerable should start to be vaccinated in quite a short space of time now and before the end of the year. So I think we're all hoping that will presage both in the UK, but also elsewhere, including in Russia, the chance as we go into 2021 for improvements and for our ability to travel safely and live and work safely, as we haven't been able to do, unfortunately, in 2020. Just a few more pieces of news, perhaps from the UK. Some of you will have seen that the British government announced the results of the spending review last week, and our Chancellor, our Minister of Finance, made a series of really quite important announcements The main focus was actually the huge cost of COVID-19, both to public finances and also to the UK economy. I mean, we're all hoping it will bounce back quickly. And one of the really positive things, I think, is the fact that the amount of support that's gone into employment, that's gone into the economy, that's going towards a transition to a lower carbon economy. And you know, for our world, one of the positive things was that the budget for the Department for International Trade was increased. I'll leave again to Trevor to say a bit more about that, but I think that's a really important signal of the government's intent as we approach the end of the transition period with the European Union. I mentioned very briefly low carbon transition, and that was a big theme of the budget last week. That will continue to be a big theme for us in the year ahead as we approach the next big UN Conference of the Party on Climate Change, COP26, which will take place in Glasgow next November. The result of the American presidential election, so with Joe Biden now president-elect, is quite a big shift there, because he has said that he's going to commit the US to a net zero target in 2050. That means you've got a big number of countries now and a big number of serious emitters making those pledges, which starts to make the challenges for COP26 and the challenges around climate change, it's still really tough, but it does mean that it looks like it's achievable. It was one of the themes, climate and how we work together, of Minister Morton's visit, and that's an area where we are, and we're hoping to work even more closely with the Russian government. It's going to be a big priority for us in the embassy, and of course we're focused on the difficult negotiations, but we're also focused on the business opportunities for both Russian and British business of the low carbon transition, because we're very clear that what we need to find is how do we grow our economies while also doing that in a low carbon way, while hitting our carbon targets and meeting the requirements of tackling dangerous climate change. So I think I will end on that note and allow Trevor to take over. I think he's next in line, but obviously very happy to pick up on any of those points in Q&A.
Great, thank you very much, Ambassador. Trevor, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Ambassador. Thanks, Alf. Yeah, as the Ambassador mentioned, so we're looking at a 2% increase on the DIT budget as a result of the spending review, and that's going to be focused on 6 particular areas. So there's going to be continued implementation of the UK's new independent trade policy, including FTA negotiations, which will cover about 80% of the world by the end of 2022. Russia won't be in the frame for that immediately, and obviously there's a lot of negotiations to be done with other countries, but that's going to be a main focus of DIT work over the next couple of years, certainly. There's going to be enhanced services for inward investors, so there's a new Office for Investment, which is going to be in Downing Street, which I think is a clear indication of how important the government sees inward investment. Russia in global terms isn't huge, but we do pretty well out of Russia. So last year there were 12 projects landed, in the terminology we use, worth about £60 million and creating about 320 jobs. And all of those jobs were at the higher end of the salary scale, so they're good high value jobs that are going into the UK from Russian investors. So that's very, very important to us. And interesting enough, quite a few of those are in the tech space and things. So there's some good collaboration going on there. A lot of work around market access. This is something we look at quite a lot in Moscow. It's where the market access barriers are, where companies tell us they've got issues. I know RBCC is closely linked with the Association of European Businesses on this, and quite a lot of the issues are similar across all countries and all businesses trying to operate here. So market access, definitely an area, trying to remove some of those barriers where we can. Certainly, general support for UK businesses looking to grow by starting to export or exporting more. So I think the focus there is particularly on new to export companies or companies who've only exported to a few markets up until now. So it's trying to, if you like, encourage them to be a little bit more adventurous. And I would certainly see Russia as a good potential market for companies, not brand new to export necessarily, but ones who haven't, sort of dipped their toes into the water here. One of the things I was quite struck by, the ambassador mentioned the visit by the minister, and I think the minister herself was saying actually she'd been quite struck by how close Russia was to the UK. I think for a lot of companies, particularly in the SME sector, there's this perception that Russia and flying to Moscow is going to take you, I don't know, 10, 12 hours, whatever it may be, whereas we all know it's only 3 or 4 hours. So using that as a sort of argument to get more companies here is something we'll look at. Project Defend, which is basically to do with the UK supply chain, so making sure that supply chain is improved and holds up well under strain. Obviously, COVID's been a bigger strain than any of us would have imagined, so some more work around that. And also a continued DIT contribution to the GREAT campaign. So any of you who have been aware of the GREAT campaign, and actually to my shame, I probably should have a GREAT campaign banner behind me, but it's a cross-government one promoting the UK across a whole range of sectors. So that's going to be the focus, certainly for DIT over the next few years. I thought I'd mention, Alf, and I'd mentioned this before, but with a little bit more detail now, the work that we've done on the services sector and UK exports to the services sector in Russia. I think I said before when we were doing this, I said we had someone looking into this for us. I didn't go into detail, but I can say now, because the report has been concluded, that it's PwC who've done some work for us. And the criteria really was built on the fact that we're very conscious that the UK share of the export market in Russia is much smaller than we have globally. So it's 3.8% in Russia, and the global average is about 7.8%. So we were aware of the gap. We weren't quite sure why there was a gap, and we still need to do some more work on that. And that's why we appointed PwC to do this research. And the criteria they looked at, because we're very conscious we couldn't do and can't do the whole of the services sector, but we asked them to say, well, look, where do you think that gap is? And then once we've identified the gap, how do we try and plug it to a certain extent? And the criteria they used for this was that they were looking for areas where the UK has a demonstrable comparative advantage, where Russian businesses and consumers have a high propensity to import those services, where there is a gap between what Russia currently imports from the UK and what we might expect them to import vis-a-vis comparator countries and global benchmarks, and at where the Russian market is not already saturated with UK imports. And that was boiled down further into 4 sectors, which we're going to do the work on now, which may be of interest particularly to people operating in those sectors. And we're very happy to speak to people and sort of share ideas with them, and also listen to views that they might have on what more we, DIT, the embassy, can do to sort of, promote British companies in those sectors and partners in those sectors. And the 4 sectors that narrowed down to advertising, market, research services, to legal and business services, and we do quite a lot on the legal services, and certainly we just recently done the English-Russian Law Week online, but we hope to bring that back again next November and do it in person, probably again to St. Petersburg and to Moscow and perhaps elsewhere. Financial services, so it's good to have Citibank on as a sponsor today, so financial services obviously very important to us, and telecommunication services, and that's quite wide, so that includes data and ICT. So those are the areas we've narrowed down. I'll be perfectly honest and say, beyond narrowing down the sectors, we haven't done quite so much work yet, because obviously we're coming towards the end of this financial year, which has been obviously pretty difficult for us in terms of securing money and putting on events. It's been pretty difficult for everybody apart from online events. But as we move into the new year and we start sort of bidding for projects for next year and for money for next year, then that's going to be very helpful for us. I perhaps shouldn't say this, but I will anyway. The one thing sometimes in government and where it's quite difficult is I think if I went back to my head office and said, look, we think these are the sectors that we should focus on, there might be some raised eyebrows, and they'll say, well, can you give us some more evidence? If I say the same thing and go back with some evidence that's been produced by obviously one of the big professional consultancy companies, I think that's likely to frankly have more traction and hopefully help us secure some more funding. So that's certainly my approach on that. Good, that's all I wanted to say for now, Alf. I've got Sarah here. I don't know whether you want to shuffle seats. I'll shuffle seats, but I'll be here and Sarah will come in.
Trevor, thank you very much for that. Very interesting, and I'm sure people have questions on the PwC report. I do myself. Sarah, very warm welcome. I know a lot of the questions are often on the consular side. Over to you. Anything you can tell will be gratefully received.
Thanks, Alf. Good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to be with you again. The big message from my side, which is and visas at the moment, is that things seem to have stabilised significantly in the past few months. On the visa side of things, the visa application centres are all open and operating as normal. We don't appear to have the huge backlogs that we did at the start of the pandemic. That isn't to say that they won't come back in depending on what's happening across Russia, but also across the UK where a lot of the services are offered. Consular services are almost back to business as usual. And thankfully that also means that travel advice hasn't been being updated basically once every week. We've stabilised on that as well. There are frequent flights between Russia and the UK. The travel advice has stayed the same for the last month to 6 weeks about what the requirements are for people coming into Russia. Gov.uk information hasn't changed fundamentally over the last few weeks about entry into the UK. So I think the consular and visa picture is looking pretty positive at the moment. The one thing that I would say to any of your members that are on the call today is do allow for delays. They are not there at the moment, but there is nothing to say that delays won't come back in. We're coming into a busier part of the year. And this also includes if you're looking for full validity passports, etc. HMPO are clearing the massive backlog that they had at the start of the pandemic. There are still a few issues, but they are trying their best to catch up on that backlog. But if you know that your passport is going to need to be renewed, or you are going to be looking for a visa to travel to the UK, try and think of it a little bit more ahead of time than you would normally, to give yourselves a fighting chance that you'll get all the documents back in time for your trips.
Great. Okay. We will now move on, if no other comments from the panel, we'll now move on to Q&A, if I may. And as I said, please keep posting your questions in the chat room. I didn't mention you can also use the hands up function on the app. And if you want to ask a question directly to the ambassador, Trevor or Sarah, use the hands up function and we'll open to you as well. But let's start off. This is a question from a journalist, in fact. We have a couple on the call. And it's to do with Brexit. And he asks, next year marks the start of the so-called Brexit era and the opportunity for the United Kingdom to conclude new trade deals with many countries across the globe. Will the conclusion of the Brexit period mark the start of a new era in bilateral trade relations between the UK and Russia? And I think let's start with the ambassador and then go to Trevor, if I may.
Sure, thank you. Well, look, the first thing I would say is actually, you know, Brexit happened on the 31st of January. So the UK has left the EU, and you may have noticed that in the course of the year, Trevor's colleagues back in London have been working hard to conclude quite a series of trade deals, actually, with big trading partners. These are all partners with whom the EU has agreements. So what we were looking at was how we built on those and continued those as we left the EU. And Trevor, that certainly, you will know better than me, but that certainly includes Canada and Japan and a series of others. There's quite a large volume of trade that is now covered by these negotiations. And one of the negotiators said to me that actually one of the few advantages of the pandemic was because they couldn't travel, they could take advantage of the time difference. And so do some negotiations in the morning in working hours with one side of the world, and then do negotiations in the afternoon with the other side of the world. I think they're all pretty tired now, but they've had a string of successes. So I think it does herald a new and different era for the UK. Russia doesn't have a trade agreement with the EU, so Russia hasn't been part of that process. The focus has been on maintaining and extending where possible the trade agreements, but certainly you know, we are looking in a whole range of different areas about how to be more visible how to use the flexibility and freedoms that we have in a new and different way. So I think it is an exciting period for us all, but we are all clearly still very focused on the pandemic and the consequences of that. But Trevor, do you want to, I'm sure you can add more detail.
Yeah, by all means, Ambassador, thank you. Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier on, so the ones that are being negotiated at the moment or sort of rolled over to a certain extent will cover about 80% of the global trading sort of base, and that leaves 20%. Russia will be in that 20%. So I wouldn't like to suggest what the timescales may be for plugging that gap, or if indeed it will be plugged. But so 80% will be covered by those. In terms of the wider question about Russia and the importance of UK-Russia trade, and I think it's worth emphasising again that Russia is still a very important market for us. It's our 21st largest trading partner and our 25th largest export market. And in fact, Russia exports about twice as much to the UK as we export to Russia. So the UK is clearly a big market for Russia. So there's lots of good business already being done. I'm very conscious and very clear in my own mind that there's more we could be doing. I'd like us to do more, and obviously that's why we try and do events. That's why we do the road shows, we do the fintech events. We've been doing quite a lot of online event, legal services. I mentioned services earlier on. These are the type of areas where I think we could be doing more trade, but I think it's still a pretty strong base to build on. But we should be doing more, and we're happy to try and do that, and we could grow it. But I wouldn't say how far we can grow it, but I've got a pretty good idea of the areas where we can grow it more. I think there was a question earlier on. One thing I didn't mention earlier on, which we have been looking at and will continue to look at, is in the education field as well. So there's plenty of growth in education, and in two ways: Russians going to the UK, British nationals coming here, or shared university courses, etc., etc. So there's more that we could be doing in that area. The Ambassador mentioned clean energy. That's certainly an area we're looking at now. It's going to be a big focus for the UK with obviously COP26. But beyond that, there's some UK companies have got some really good products. I think David Gardner's got a question in there, so I don't want to cut across there, but looking at waste management, clean energy, hydrogen's an area we're looking at, whether we can do some more work with Russia on hydrogen. The Russian government, I think via the RBCC, actually approached us to see if there's more that we can do to work together on hydrogen. So I was in St. Petersburg this week and had meetings with the mining university, which isn't an obvious home for this, but they are doing some work in that. And I've been speaking to various British companies who've got some really good technologies that can help with the sort of energy transition into clean or cleaner energy, and hydrogen is definitely one of the areas that we're looking at. So I think just built around those, this trading relationship could grow, and I hope it will do, because ultimately that's my job. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. We're all aware of the government message to look for markets outside of the more traditional EU markets, which business is used to trading through. Do you see business actually reacting to that message, or do you suspect there'll be a bit of a time lag before they actually start looking outside their traditional markets?
I think businesses are looking at it, but of course it's difficult to measure that, particularly with COVID, because I think there's lots of companies who probably would have been a bit more adventurous by now, particularly as sort of the transition period, EU exit, comes to an end, who probably would have been looking over the last year, but I think have been concentrating more on their key markets and surviving to a certain extent. And we've got plenty of businesses on there, so I can't speak for them, but that's my general sense. I would think hopefully as the vaccines come in, COVID comes to an end, then companies will start to look, and I would hope that they're a little bit more adventurous. I say the problem, you know this much better than I do, Alf, through your membership, but the problem we sometimes have is actually in attracting the SMEs to look at Russia in the first place, because they often hear the bad news and they watch the media and they think Russia is perhaps a far more difficult market than it is. And to a certain extent, that's where we need the help from you and your members, people who've actually got the hands-on experience of doing business in Russia, so to try and get them to speak to companies through their own experiences and how they've sort of navigated their way through the Russian market, so that companies think, well, it's not just the government guy who's telling me this is what companies are telling me as well, and they did successful business. So I'd hope that as sort of the EU exit period and into next year comes, then companies will start to look much more at places like Russia, as I say, but unfortunately I think COVID's probably delayed that process a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Trevor. And please, audience out there, keep your questions coming. Use the chat room. Use the hands up function if you prefer. Next question is from Bryn Howells, and he asks, I think we've had similar before, but it's a good question. Now that EU countries will have easier electronic visa access, what can be done to ease entry between the UK and Russia? And also, and a follow-on part of the question, can the COVID certificate requirement be removed as it's meaningless anyways? And I'm guessing he's Bryn means into Russia, but it's not clear. Ambassador, would you like to start with that one?
Shall I kick off? So I'm assuming Bryn means that this is the law that's going through the Duma that will expand the electronic visas. I'm afraid it doesn't include the UK or indeed I think the US or Canada, Australia or New Zealand. It includes quite a lot of other countries. I mean, obviously that is a matter for the Russian government. It would be, great if they extended it, but it is a matter for them. I mean, interestingly, at the moment, it's British nationals who can travel freely, with a visa into Russia, and actually EU nationals can't for the most part, except if they've got a particular kind of visa relationship. So. But I mean, we'll have to see how that develops. But it is a matter for the Russian government. I mean, the requirement to have a negative COVID test, which I think is, again, that's a Russian government requirement. It's not a UK government requirement. So it's not one that that we would particularly lobby on. Different countries are doing this in different ways. We've got 2 weeks self-isolation, or as I said, in a couple of weeks, we've got the 5 days isolation and then a test. Other countries quite a lot of other countries aren't allowing non-nationals in at all. I mean, clearly for the UK, we are continuing to look at how we improve our visa offer, how we make it faster and as straightforward as possible. And there have been changes that have been brought forward on student visas, and there was an announcement earlier this week on the new points-based immigration framework. So that's something that we will continue to work on, which will apply, for Russian nationals as elsewhere. I mean, Sarah, I don't know if you want to come in and add anything to that, but maybe I've been quite comprehensive.
I think, I think that is, thanks very much, Ambassador, that is pretty comprehensive. I think the thing on the negative COVID testing, I think to be clear, it's actually the airlines that look for you to have a negative test more than the Russian government, because the Russian government rules are you could get a test up to 48 hours after arrival into the country, but depending on which country you are coming in from, it's the airlines that are carrying you as a passenger that are requiring a negative test in order for you to fly. So there's only so much we can do on that.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for that clarification. I wasn't aware of that. I think we'll stay with the visa theme at the moment. A question from Jake Wilson asking, is there, and this affects a lot of people, so quite a few people concerned about it, including myself, so that's why I'm asking it. Is there any news regarding visa extension in Russia? Currently, expired visas are valid until the 15th of December 2020. Does anyone have an update? And obviously with Christmas, that's going to complicate matters massively, and a great deal of uncertainty around that. Ambassador or Sarah?
Sarah, I haven't heard anything, but I don't know if Sarah has.
No, I haven't, but I can follow it up and feed the information back in afterwards, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's move on. We have a question from Rupert Gaither. UK is recognised as a European hub for startups and innovation. What is DIT doing to promote UK and Russia as a destination? And what more can be done to promote routes like the innovative visa? Trevor, I think that's a natural one for you.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, I don't want to get drawn on the visas because obviously we don't control the policy for that. Yeah. But what I can say, and I mentioned earlier on, is that we're very keen to get more Russian companies, particularly innovative companies, to enter into the UK and to look at the UK as a base. I mentioned the figures before for last year, and the year before was something similar. So certainly in the ICT field, in the innovation field more generally, if you like, because most of the Russian companies that are going over to the UK are pretty innovative in their own ways in different sectors. So some are doing control mechanisms, and they're all trying trying to do different things. I think there's also an issue there that for some Russian companies, they see the UK as actually a very good base from which to grow from. I think if they've got some really good technologies coming out of Russia, that's great in terms of the technology itself. I think by going into the UK and then launching them out of the UK, it seems to work a bit better for them as well. And of course, actually, in some cases, by being in the UK, in some of the clusters, there's also the infrastructure around them and some of the human talent around them. That really makes the UK a great place for them to go. So I think that's why we're having as much success as we are. I'd like to see it much more than that, but what we're tending to get from Russia are those smaller, innovative companies rather than the sort of big investments. I talk about the numbers being relatively small. So we're not talking about companies going in and building huge factories that manufacture in the UK and employ, you know, hundreds of people on shift patterns and things like that. It's not that type of investment. It's very much more bespoke investment, if you like, 3, 4, 5 people with the potential to grow, and most of that is in the innovation space. In terms of what's on offer in the UK, well, I can't go through it all now, and I'd struggle to remember the detail anyway, but there's a huge amount of support available around innovation, a lot of it based on the technologies themselves, some of it based on clusters that are developing around particular themes. So it might be games, it might be videos, it might be financial services, and these clusters are growing up in different parts of the country, and obviously part of this I think will increase and accelerate over the next few years. And I think it's pretty well known to everybody in terms of the government's levelling up sort of, you know, policy to move people to different parts of the UK. So whether that could be parts of Scotland that are focusing on something, parts of the northeast, Grimsby, Humberside, wherever it may be, these different clusters are building up around the country. So I think depending on what your innovation is and what your specialisation will be, then the idea there will be that we would try and point you to those areas so that infrastructure, that framework is there for you to build on. I hope that covers it enough, but certainly not on the visas, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you very much, Trevor. I get another question for Trevor. You alluded to it earlier on. It's from David Gardner. David, thank you very much for your persistence in pursuing this very important topic. It's a slightly long question, but I'll read it out in any case. Following what must be the largest Russian delegation to the UK in recent years and visit to waste management enterprises in early March, what level of contact is being maintained with the regional participants? From his side, he's finding UK industry slow to react to this serious ecological opportunity in which the UK leads as a major world player.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, firstly, I mean, thanks to David for the support he gave us in putting together that mission, which I guess was over a year or so ago, or about a year or so ago. It was well received. I think that the importance of that particular mission was that a lot of the specialists who came weren't just from Moscow and St. Petersburg. They really did come from a long way away, some of the cities over in Russia's Far East. And that was very important to us to make sure that the sort of technologies and the ideas were shared with a much wider audience. In terms of the follow-up, I'm sure David will appreciate, due to COVID, it's not been what it would have been normally, but we will rebuild that once we get into the new year. We haven't been able to go out to many of those cities, and for the same reasons, they haven't been able to come in and see us. We did one subsequent online event, which again was well attended by the people to keep the momentum going, and we will do that. And there were particular areas that were of a lot of interest to Russian sort of partners on this, particularly things like waste to energy. That's one area that really took off, and they were very interested in the UK technologies. But absolutely, we do need to keep that going. It's part of our sort of what's fairly loose at the moment, because our financial year starts in April, but our initial planning in terms of what we would do for the next financial year. But the waste management side of it definitely will be a factor for us, and certainly an area where we'll be delivering more events, whether that's here or whether that's in the UK. But David's right, we haven't had enough contact with those people who came, but it's not through lack of effort, it's more just down to the situation we find ourselves in.
Great, thank you very much, Trevor. I'll combine two questions here. They're both generally about the Russian-British relationship, probably more at the political level. The first one is, how do you think the relationship will develop after COVID-19 disappears? And then related to that is, do you think the expected sort of fallout from COVID-19, perhaps a recession, will that bring the two countries closer together? And I'll put that to the ambassador.
So, thank you. Look, I'm afraid I'm not sure I'm convinced that COVID-19 is going to disappear, but I hope the premise of the question right. But anyway, look, I think what will happen in 2021 is that we will have more opportunities to meet and talk to one another face to face. That's been really hard in 2020 for obvious reasons. And one of the reasons I think I was so pleased that Minister Wendy Morton came out, but also I think the Russian government was very pleased she came out, was that we all appreciate just how tough it is traveling at the moment, and you know, the additional risk that entails. So the fact that she was prepared to come, despite all of that, I think was an indication of her, you know, commitment to maintaining dialogue and deepening dialogue between the UK and Russia. And I think the Russian side appreciated that. But I don't want to, you know, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We will continue to have, I think, very deep and profound disagreements about a range of issues. And, you know, from a UK perspective, we will have to continue to focus on the security of our country and our nationals. And that is going to lead to areas of disagreement. What I hope the visit did was demonstrate that we can talk about both those things where we disagree, but also we can talk about areas on which we agree. And I think, as both Trevor and I have said, that the opportunity to work together on both in the preparation for COP26, Russia is a member of the Paris, is part of the Paris Agreement. Russia is the 4th largest global emitter, also has the largest boreal forests on the planet. There's a lot that Russia can do here, and there's a lot that the UK can and is doing. So I think there's a lot of scope to work together on both the low carbon transition and climate. I think there's, as Trevor said, there's more to do on economy and trade, not as a political issue, but just as a vehicle that will help both the Russian people and the British people prosper, particularly in the aftermath of the terrible consequences of the pandemic. Does that give enough of an answer? You know, we had to, obviously, like everyone, we pulled a lot of activity this year that we had planned, but we will, I hope, be able, even if, as I suspect, the virus won't disappear, I hope we will be able to manage it in a way that enables us to start talking directly much more frequently in 2021.
Great. Thank you very much, Ambassador. We have, it's more of a statement, but I think it's interesting and worthy of comment. It's from Margarita Bagrova. She's editor-in-chief of Afisha, independent London-based Russian magazine. And she says she covers art, culture, travel, city lifestyle, and the mission of the magazine is to promote deeper understanding and links between the UK and Russia. She's basically asking for assistance in reaching out to more people, but it'd be quite interesting to hear what the embassy is actually doing in that respect, because often it's one of the most sort of prominent and effective ways of achieving exactly that.
So sure. Look, thank you. And I should say one of the things that the minister did was visit the Pushkin Museum in order to see there's a British poster exhibition, and you know, and it was a really vivid illustration, I think, of UK-Russia collaboration in the cultural area, despite the pandemic and despite the more difficult political relationship. So it's certainly something that we remain committed to. I hope there's going to be some positive news next year about taking forward some of the legacy of the Year of Music. We have a new cultural councillor has arrived in Moscow this week, and he'll be coming over full time early next year. So the British Council activity, the cultural British Council / cultural team activity will start gearing up again. You know, as COVID conditions allow, but they're certainly looking to continue to enhance that area of the relationship, because it really matters, and because both sides have so much to offer.
Great, thank you very much. I think every Q&A session needs one left field question, and here it comes. It's from Robin Preston. It's a good question. Winston Churchill described Russia as a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. Would you agree?
Look, that's a really unfair question because I have to agree with Winston Churchill, don't I? I'm not allowed to not agree with Winston Churchill. But look, I think that Russia's, like most places, needs to be listened to, and that both on the UK side, we need to listen to Russia and what it's saying, and the Russian side needs to listen to us and what we're saying, and then. That way we will help understanding on both sides and perhaps be a bit less of an enigma or a riddle or whatever.
Thank you. Good. Okay. Just as an aside, really, for Sarah, one of our listeners has said that the Russian Visa Centre now advise they require you to attend for a COVID test. So he's saying perhaps it's not just airlines. So
Okay.
yeah. So
I'll also
first,
that out. That's news to me. So
great. Okay. Thank you very much. A question for Trevor, quite specific, but from Campbell Sherlaw. He said a few years ago they're working on quite a sort of exciting telemedicine initiative between Russia in the Arctic regions and Scotland. This ran aground a few years ago. Is, in your view, is the time right to revisit such an initiative?
Well, it'd be interesting to know a little bit more background on it, because I'm not entirely sure whether it's one that we did sort of, under the trade pillar, or whether it was one more, because we've done quite a lot of work in the Arctic generally from the embassy. So it'd be interesting to know the background to that. What I can say as far as medicine is concerned and telemedicine, then it would be an area of interest, and I'd look at it more from a commercial perspective than anything else. And one area that we're particularly looking at the moment is around oncology and oncology treatment. So if there's areas there that could be delivered through telemedicine, and you can bring them together in that way, then it's certainly something that we could look at. But if Campbell's happy enough to share some of the background to that, we'd probably be able to, find out exactly how it was sort of looked after before, who managed it, and what the background to it was. It's certainly not on my immediate agenda, I'll be honest. But this is the first time I've heard of it. But it could be colleagues who've obviously moved on subsequently who were leading on it. But happy to have a look at the background and see what can be done. As I mentioned before, education, and one of the areas certainly in education, and this came up, so it would have been last year when we had the 15 sort of vice chancellors or senior representatives from the UK universities here. One of the areas that did come up and that they were keen on doing more was around research and development together. So that's the type of thing that might fit into that sort of space rather than the purely commercial. But as I say, it would be good to know the background, and then perhaps we can see exactly how it was done before and why it was done in a particular way, and see how we could build on that.
Great. Okay, thank you, Trevor. We have time for a few more questions. I have a couple left. So if you haven't asked something and you want to ask it, now's your time. Please put it in the chat room or use the hands up function. This is a question from Alina Baxter. It's quite a serious question. She describes how hard hit the UK hospitality industry has been. She lauds the news that the self-isolation period will be reduced to 5 days if you provide the negative test, and asks whether Russia might be given or put on the list of corridor countries. But she adds that you can't convince tourists to stay with a 5-day isolation period, and also, the real issue of boarding school students and the impact that sort of thing has on their mental health, not seeing their parents for, I've heard of cases up to a year now. Ambassador, please.
Look, it's a great question. And so the issue of divided families is something that we're really, really conscious of. And obviously, within the embassy, many of us are living through that. And indeed, within the wider British diplomatic network, many of us are living with that, and it's been such a tough year. And I think we're all hoping that with vaccines arriving, that 2021 will allow all of us and everyone everywhere to see much more, to see that as much as they want of their family and friends. So I think we're really, really conscious of that. I'm also really conscious of the hit that the hospitality sector has suffered in the UK and indeed in many other countries. as you say, I think the option, at least in England, of the 5 days self-isolation followed by a test is a really positive step forward. Hopefully we can look ahead, as I say, into 2021 of further measures which will start to make travel even more straightforward. The issue of the corridor countries, this is done largely on a scientific basis. There's an institute that assesses the COVID risk in different countries, and it has to be pretty low for countries to be on that list. And I'm afraid, at least for the moment, Russia, is way above anything that they would consider. Of course, we all hope, particularly those of us who live in Russia, that is going to turn around soon. But I think it's likely to be a bit of time. So I think all I can say is we're really conscious of the issue. Governments everywhere are trying to balance health concerns with economic concerns, and health concerns, of course, are COVID, but also mental and other health concerns. And we're hoping that as we move into 2021, we'll be able to continue to make things easier on all of those fronts. But I think we've still got a tough few weeks ahead of us, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yeah, no, it's an important issue. A very interesting question from Andrei Pecherin, and he's asking, I suppose, either the Ambassador or Trevor, what's the status of the UK-US trade deal? Easy access to the US market could very much increase the attractiveness of the UK for startups, even from Russia.
So there's lots of work going on, but Trevor, do you want to say a bit more about? I mean, we can't say that much about the detail, except that it's a very intensive area of activity. But Trevor, do you want to add?
I'm not really up with the detail either, Ambassador, but I'm aware, I mean, a lot of this is media speculation and some internal speculation, and negotiations are ongoing, but obviously these are very sensitive. So I think they're sort of kept fairly close hold, as you might imagine. So I wouldn't like to speculate on timescales or anything like that. But I do agree, I can see that access, for companies to go into the UK and use that as a springboard into the American market would be very attractive. But we're clearly not there just as things stand.
Okay, great.
I mean, the US is one of the countries which was identified as a top priority for us for a new trade agreement. And so there's been a lot of effort put in. I assume that with the change in administration, there will be a bit of a pause until that picks up again. Okay, but it's a major priority.
Yeah, thank you very much. One perhaps for Ambassador again and Sarah to comment on, and it's a technical thing on visas. Can you comment on the time frame it's taking people to get work permits for UK work secondments?
So to the best of my knowledge, and I'm not the visa expert, I am covering the section at the moment, it's reverted back to the original time frame. So gov.uk should have all the latest time frames for turning visas around. I'm happy to speak to colleagues that are more up on this subject, and I'll email you the information if you can share it with your colleagues.
Great, thank you very much. Good. And we have a sort of rebuttal of the comment before. The Russian visa center just offers COVID tests, and tests can be taken at all valid PCR testing centers. Okay, but they're still asking for them by the sounds of it. Great. Well, I think that is all the questions I have at the moment. I think I'll give the audience a last chance to ask any questions. Oh, here one's popping up. Okay, interesting. How can we get involved in Russo-British cultural activities? Any advice?
So we don't have that many on at the moment because we're because of the pandemic. But we do. But actually, I should say we have been doing a lot online, including the festival. I mean, it was wider than cultural, but it involved cultural, including some Birmingham bands playing with some Yekaterinburg bands, so which I would definitely recommend. It's called Different Ever After. If you follow us on Facebook, we're on, Sarah may be able to help me, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Telegram, Twitter, probably some other things as well. But if you go on any of our main social media sites, you'll find lots of information about what we're doing virtually and online. and obviously, hopefully, we'll be able to start doing a few more things offline and sort of in person as we move into 2021. Particularly, you know, now we've got a new cultural counsellor, and I should say Sarah at the moment is covering, I think, at least 2 people's jobs, but we do have a new UK-based visa member of staff who will be starting in the new year. So that will be one job that she can sort of stop covering and go back to a bit more to her core responsibilities. But we are looking forward to some new colleagues starting in the new year that will mean we're more fully staffed than we have been for a bit. But we will get back to culture and because it is so important. We have been doing most of our things online in the course of this year.
Great. Ambassador, thank you very much. That's all the questions we have. Would you like to perhaps make a closing statement?
So could I just sort of say, look, thank you. I think we're all at the embassy here. We're all really grateful for the engagement we've had from the RBCC, from all your members, you know, over these calls throughout the pandemic. You know, we've remained here throughout the pandemic. We will be here in 2021 as well. So I hope we'll continue to engage and both online, but hopefully as soon as it's safe to do so, offline as well. It's a bit early to say Merry Christmas, but maybe if you don't mind, if I can just wish everyone, and particularly for those of you, you know, who observe the Orthodox Christmas, but if you don't mind, I will wish all of you a safe and healthy and happy festive season, and I hope that all of you manage to see your families and friends. So thanks very much for participating and for all your great questions, and please take care of yourselves in the next few weeks in particular.
Ambassador, Trevor, Sarah, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Ekaterina Komarova again from City Russia for sponsoring today's event. And of course, to the listeners, both members and friends, very pleased you took the time out to join us today. Our next event is on Friday, so please join us then. All the details are on the website, but we will be interviewing the renowned blogger, Elisa Grafton. So please join us then. Have a great afternoon or morning, wherever you are, and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Al.
Bye.